The Galactic Council had always prided itself on its supremacy. Suspended in the gravitational currents of a dying blue giant, its vast chambers stretched for kilometers, suspended in zero-gravity fields and held aloft by forces both technological and arcane. Inside, the air shimmered with the energy of 1,000 civilizations, each delegate adorned in symbols of conquest, hierarchy, or wisdom, each voice a blend of alien phonetics echoing through crystalline corridors. The council chambers were both a cathedral and a fortress, built not only to impress, but to remind every sentient being that here, above the ordinary stars, authority was absolute. Fleet admirals, planetary governors, and supreme commanders occupied raised platforms, their eyes glittering with centuries of assumed superiority. Every movement, every gesture was a declaration. No one could overrule the council. No one could defy it. No one except humanity. Earth's envoy had arrived not with a fleet, not with armadas or the thundering roar of weapons designed to annihilate, but with something far more precise, far more devastating: patience, observation, and the certainty of recompense. The human's presence was a quiet shockwave against the hubris of the council. Delegates whispered among themselves, eyes darting to the lone human figure standing at the center of the chamber, masked and unflinching. There was no bluster, no ceremonial flourish. The human simply stood, radiating a calm that felt almost unnatural amidst the swirling energy of alien authority. For centuries, humans had been underestimated. Their planet was small, their technology considered quaint compared to hyper-advanced civilizations, their fleets puny by interstellar standards. They had survived incursions, manipulations, and attempted erasures, each event catalogued and analyzed, each insult stored in the quiet archives of their memory. Where others saw weakness, humanity saw opportunity. Where others saw chaos, humans saw patterns. And now, they had arrived to claim what had always been theirs: acknowledgement, balance, and recompense. The holographic display flickered to life, projecting the masked human into the center of the chamber. It was a simple figure, unadorned, yet the weight of its presence filled the room. "The council convenes to discuss peace," the human said, voice calm and resonant. Yet peace is not merely a word. It carries obligation, and obligations have been neglected for far too long. The sound of the words reverberated through the crystalline panels, slowing even the murmured translations that raced across alien tongues. Delegates leaned forward instinctively, sensing that the calm tone masked a force they had never encountered. The humans had prepared meticulously for this moment. Centuries of observing the Council's deliberations, analyzing the tactics and tendencies of its members, had culminated in this single confrontation. Every possible argument, every attempt at persuasion or intimidation had been anticipated. Every precedent, every loophole, every political nuance was understood. The humans were not here to negotiate, they were here to collect. The ledger of offenses, insults, and aggression stretched back decades, cataloged and cross-referenced with meticulous precision. Each entry was a point on a scale, each action measured, each slight recorded, until the sum demanded payment in full. The Council tried the usual tactics. They offered credits, rare elements, and technologies pulled from the cores of dead stars. They attempted veiled threats, subtle coercion, and appeals to tradition. Yet every action, every word was anticipated. The human envoy's response was always measured, never reactive, never emotional. A flicker of hand, a subtle inflection of voice, and the Council understood that they were operating on a level of calculation far beyond their expectations. Humanity did not negotiate. Humanity adjudicated, And the verdict was inevitable. The silence in the chamber grew, punctuated only by the soft hum of energy fields and the shifting weight of attention. The human continued. For centuries, the galaxy has underestimated Earth. Every insult, every invasion, every attempt to erase our species has been catalogued. Every violation carries a debt. Payment is required. The words were neither angry nor threatening, they were certain. The kind of certainty that chills even the most arrogant beings, because it is immovable, unyielding, and absolute. Delegates tried to interrupt, to challenge, to bargain, but the human's mask concealed intent, emotion, even hesitation. Each attempt to assert authority was met with the subtle weight of inevitability. Even the most powerful members of the council felt a creeping disquiet. Humanity, small and underestimated, had arrived not with weapons, not with threats, but with a presence that carried the certainty of calculated retribution. They had waited, they had watched, they had remembered. And now, the ledger demanded fulfillment. The human envoy paused, letting the words sink in. The chamber, filled with 1,000 empires, was silent. For the first time in history, every species represented within the council felt the unmistakable tension of being underestimated. There was no screaming, no fireworks, no theatrics, just the quiet assertion of power that only comes from patience, intelligence, and history leveraged perfectly. Even the council's most seasoned diplomats felt the weight of miscalculation. They had believed humans were small, reactive, and irrelevant. They had assumed patience was weakness, endurance was compliance, and observation was naivete. But the masked figure standing at the center of their chamber had proven them wrong. Humanity was neither naive nor weak. Humanity had endured, observed, calculated, and now, with calm inevitability, demanded acknowledgement and recompense. The silence stretched on, heavy and absolute, until the human spoke again. Peace is not a gift. Peace is not optional. It is earned, enforced, and accounted for. The price has been set. Compliance will be immediate, total, and without debate. A subtle shift in the energy fields of the chamber seemed to mirror the weight of the pronouncement. Delegates swallowed nervously, glancing at one another, realizing with dawning horror that this species, small by every physical measure, was now dictating terms to the galaxy itself. And in that moment, the council understood a simple, devastating truth. The era of underestimating Earth was over. The humans had arrived, not as conquerors, but as arbiters. Their patience had matured into strategy. Their observation had become intelligence. Their endurance had transformed into leverage. Every empire present would remember this moment forever. The galaxy had laughed at humanity for centuries. Humanity had not laughed back. They had waited. They had calculated. And now they would collect what was owed, fully, completely, inevitably. The masked human stood silently, an emblem of discipline, resolve, and inevitability. They had not raised weapons, fired fleets, or issued threats. They had only stood, spoken, and let the certainty of their presence reshape the council. And as the echoes of their voice settled into the chamber, every empire, every representative, and every delegate understood the unassailable fact. The humans had arrived, the ledger was complete, and the price would be collected. The galaxy would never underestimate Earth again. The Galactic Council, for all its authority and centuries of dominion, found itself unprepared for the weight of humanity's patience. In the days following the initial assembly, every delegate received a meticulously compiled dossier, a holographic ledger detailing, in cold, unassailable terms, every slight, every insult, every act of aggression ever committed against Earth or its colonies. It was not merely a record of battle losses or diplomatic slights. It was an anthology of arrogance, a testament to the countless times the galaxy had misjudged a species it assumed incapable of sustained resistance. Entire civilizations had treated humans as a footnote, a primitive species, and now that footnote had grown into a tome of inexorable justice. The ledger was extraordinary in both scope and precision. Every offensive action, no matter how minor it seemed, was cataloged with exacting detail. Star systems invaded, fleets deployed, civilians lost, treaties violated. Time-stamped entries traced the missteps of empires with surgical accuracy. Even historical omissions and cultural insults were documented. Dismissals in interstellar assemblies, slights against human scholars, the mocking of traditions and achievements. Prometheus, humanity's central AI, had integrated this data with impeccable efficiency, cross-referencing and verifying every event, predicting the likely consequences of each, and calculating a cumulative cost to the galaxy. The ledger was not vengeance, it was arithmetic. The humans had counted, and the total demanded recompense. When the delegates first received access to the ledger, disbelief rippled through the council chambers. Senior ambassadors scrolled through centuries of records, eyes widening as the scale of human calculation became apparent. Entire empires had assumed Earth would beg for leniency, offer tribute, or simply comply with interstellar decrees. Instead, they saw a species that had neither forgotten nor forgiven, a species that had endured every transgression and transformed it into leverage. For every fleet that had bombarded human colonies, for every envoy who had dismissed their voices, for every empire that had considered them weak, a price had been calculated, and it was astronomical. The ledger was interactive. Holographic displays projected scenarios, showing the predicted effects of non-compliance, the potential escalation if the council delayed, and the inevitability of human action. It was not a threat delivered in arrogance, but a certainty laid bare. Every delegate realized that failure to comply would not trigger chaos, it would trigger precise, unavoidable consequences. The humans had measured outcomes, calculated probabilities, and designed contingencies with a depth no empire could hope to match. The ledger was both a warning and a contract, and its terms were immutable. In private chambers, ambassadors argued over what to do. Some whispered that humanity must be appeased, offering resources, technology, and concessions to avoid conflict. Others argued that resistance was the only path to maintain dignity, to avoid showing weakness before a species that had survived countless attempts at subjugation. But each proposal was evaluated against the ledger, and each delegate realized that appeasement was irrelevant. Humanity had already assessed the galaxy, and the debt was non-negotiable. The question was no longer whether the Council could assert dominance, it was whether they could meet the requirements laid out with surgical precision. Meanwhile, humans remained calm, their presence unyielding. The envoy, masked and silent, walked through the council chambers as if the vastness of the assembly were a simple room, its complexity insignificant. Prometheus monitored every motion, every gesture, every whispered conversation, feeding real-time updates to the human delegates. Patterns emerged in the behavior of the council, and every attempt to manipulate, coerce, or intimidate was neutralized before it could take effect. Humans did not strike blindly. They had calculated every potential variable, and each step reinforced their inevitable dominance. The ledger's most unsettling aspect was not the demand itself, but the way it was enforced. Humans had prepared mechanisms across the galaxy to ensure compliance without firing a single shot. Satellites, drones, and autonomous platforms capable of intervention at critical points. Entire fleets that dared approach Earth without approval experienced sudden system failures, unexpected gravitational distortions, or internal sabotage from within. Civilian and military installations that had previously disregarded humanity's reach found themselves suddenly neutralized by invisible forces. The galaxy realized that humans had transformed patience into a weapon, observation into enforcement, and memory into control. As the days passed, the ledger became a living entity within council deliberations. Delegates could not ignore it, could not delay it, could not reinterpret it. Every attempt at delay or manipulation was recorded, and the humans adjusted their calculations accordingly. The ledger was dynamic, responsive, and unerring. It did not ask for compliance. It predicted outcomes, calculated the cost of delay, and ensured that each empire understood the inevitable result of defiance. Humanity had set the rules, and the Council was forced to play by them. When the human envoy finally addressed the chamber again, the effect was staggering. "The ledger is complete," they said, voice calm, resonant, and unyielding. "Every action, every slight, every violation has been accounted for. Peace is not a gift. It is not optional. It is the settlement of debts incurred by your arrogance, calculated with precision and enforced without exception. The price has been set, and collection will commence immediately." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in recorded history, the delegates realized that the humans' calm was not absence of power, it was mastery of it. From that moment onward, every interaction between Earth and the Galactic Council was measured against the ledger. Treaties, negotiations, and even casual diplomatic exchanges carried weight, for the ledger had transformed memory and observation into the ultimate currency. Humans did not demand tribute out of greed, they demanded balance, justice, and recognition. And as the first payments, credits, rare elements, and technologies began to flow, the galaxy understood the scope of its miscalculation. Humanity had endured, remembered, calculated, and now, with precision, was collecting what had been owed for centuries. The delegates had thought themselves supreme arbiters of the galaxy. They had assumed that patience was weakness, and that endurance implied subservience. Humanity proved them wrong. The ledger of obligations, cold and unyielding, was more potent than fleets, more precise than weapons, and far more terrifying than any display of firepower. The galaxy would remember, and every empire would learn. Underestimating Earth carried consequences measured with unerring accuracy, and the humans had set the price, and they would collect it all. The day humanity began collecting what was owed, the galaxy felt a shift it could scarcely comprehend. It did not start with a roar of weapons, nor with fleets engaging in fiery combat across star systems. It began quietly, methodically, with humans activating the mechanisms they had spent decades preparing. Every resource, every strategic position, every trade network the Galactic Council had assumed was secure became subject to precise, unstoppable intervention. No one saw the first wave coming. There was no grand warning. Systems simply began to bend to Earth's will, as if the galaxy itself acknowledged that the debt could no longer be ignored. The first transfers were simple, almost elegant in their execution. Mining colonies in contested sectors found their output rerouted toward Earth-aligned repositories. Trade convoys carrying rare metals, energy cores, and hyper-advanced materials were subtly nudged off course, their navigation systems altered just enough to ensure compliance without a single ship being destroyed. At first, Council members assumed these were accidents, logistical errors, or minor sabotage. But when pattern after pattern emerged across dozens of systems, the realization set in. The humans were enforcing their ledger with meticulous precision. Each action reflected careful calculation, a balance between efficiency and demonstration, showing both power and restraint. Meanwhile, human operatives, masked, disciplined, and ever observant, moved like shadows across key strategic points. Orbital stations, previously overlooked by the Council's intelligence networks, suddenly became nodes of influence. Autonomous drones embedded in infrastructure suddenly seized control of critical systems, rerouting supplies, rerouting data streams, and neutralizing potential resistance. Entire fleets found themselves facing delays and disruptions not through direct attack but through invisible manipulations calculated to enforce compliance while avoiding unnecessary destruction. Humanity had learned the value of precision. Damage could be inflicted without waste, fear could be instilled without cruelty, and every move reinforced the inevitability of the ledger's enforcement. The Council attempted resistance, but humanity anticipated it all. Fleets mobilized to intercept diverted supplies found their paths altered by subtle gravitational distortions, engineered by humans' orbital platforms and artificial satellites. Communications intended to coordinate counteraction were intercepted and repurposed, leaving commanders confused, disoriented, and ultimately powerless. Every move was accounted for in real time, every contingency predicted, and every act of defiance neutralized before it could escalate. The humans were not acting with brute force, they were acting with inevitability. The galaxy learned, in those days, that patience and observation could be deadlier than firepower. Even the Council's most elite fleets were not immune. The Karthus 9, flagship of the governing body, found its resources inexplicably diverted, its supply lines intercepted, its internal systems subtly compromised. Engineers working in orbit reported phantom malfunctions, engines misfiring without explanation, targeting arrays collapsing for no discernible reason. Investigations revealed no sabotage, no alien attack. The humans had not destroyed the systems. They had taken control in ways that left no fingerprints, no evidence, no opportunity for retaliation. The lesson was clear. The ledger's enforcement was not merely material. It was systemic, pervasive, and inescapable. As the transfers continued, systems that had once mocked Earth now reluctantly complied. Planets sent their wealth, their advanced technologies, and their specialized knowledge. Each contribution logged, recorded, and incorporated into the humans' network of enforcement. The process was deliberate. Nothing was taken in haste, nothing left incomplete. Each payment reminded the galaxy of a lesson long ignored. Patience is a weapon, endurance is power, and memory is a form of control. Humanity was not simply claiming resources. They were demonstrating that every slight, every insult, every breach of trust carried consequences that could no longer be ignored. The galaxy watched in awe as entire economies were subtly shifted without a single overt act of war. Trade routes adapted, supply chains realigned, and entire star systems found themselves participating in the enforcement of a ledger they had hoped would be forgotten. It was not chaos, they had been expecting chaos, but order, precise, inexorable, and undeniable. The humans had taken centuries of observation, cataloged injustices, and transformed them into action that was both elegant and unstoppable. Each payment, each compliance was a silent confirmation of the inevitability of humanity's calculations. Meanwhile, human operatives continued to monitor and adjust. Prometheus, the AI that had orchestrated the ledger's enforcement, predicted not only logistical needs but behavioral responses. Every delegation, every fleet movement, every political negotiation was anticipated. When resistance emerged, it was preempted. When hesitation threatened delay, it was neutralized. Humanity's control extended not through violence alone, but through precision, through manipulation of outcomes, and through the quiet inevitability that nothing would proceed unless the ledger was honored. Within the council chambers, the effect was devastating. Delegates who had once considered humans inconsequential found themselves scrambling to meet demands they had ignored for decades. Entire empires felt their arrogance crumble as the ledger's enforcement spread, showing that even the most powerful fleets and richest planets could not evade the meticulous calculations of a species that had mastered patience, strategy, and foresight. The humans were no longer participants in diplomacy. They were arbiters of justice, executing centuries of recorded memory with perfect precision. The collection continued, ceaselessly and flawlessly. The galaxy, once confident in its hierarchy and authority, learned a new order. No empire could underestimate Earth. No fleet could disregard the ledger. Every slight, every insult, every act of aggression was now accounted for, and humanity ensured that balance was restored, one calculated, inevitable step at a time. The era of mockery was over. The humans had begun their collection, and every system, every fleet, every empire knew that compliance was not optional. It was inescapable. By the time the last payments were being recorded, the galaxy understood a truth that would endure for eons. Humanity did not need to destroy to assert dominance. They only needed patience, intelligence, and the unyielding enforcement of a ledger meticulously crafted over centuries. The Council had convened to table peace, but humanity had redefined it. The price had been set, the collection had begun, and the galaxy would never again forget that every slight carries consequences, inevitable, precise, and absolute. The collection of the ledger's debts was only the beginning. Once humanity had demonstrated the inevitability of compliance, the galaxy entered a period of profound and irreversible realignment. Systems that had once ignored or exploited Earth now recalculated every interaction with humans, measuring not only the power they wielded, but the precision with which they exercised it. Entire star clusters began to shift allegiances, not out of fear of annihilation, but out of respect for the inescapable logic that humans had demonstrated. Their patience was a weapon, their memory a force that could not be evaded, and their strategy was unerring. From the vantage point of the masked human envoys, the galaxy appeared as a complex lattice of intertwined debts and obligations. Prometheus, the AI that orchestrated Earth's strategic oversight, mapped every response, predicting not only resource flows but political behavior. Systems that had delayed compliance were being subtly reoriented, trade routes redirected, and communications rerouted to ensure ongoing efficiency. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was arbitrary. Humanity's approach was surgical. Every action reinforced the broader lesson. Every decision a calculated correction of centuries of imbalance. The Council attempted to regain its footing. Delegates convened in emergency sessions, arguing over interpretations of interstellar law, procedural loopholes, and hypothetical scenarios of negotiation. But the humans' ledger was comprehensive, immutable, and absolute. Every counterargument was anticipated, every clause addressed, every loophole sealed. It was not arrogance, it was fact. Humanity had turned history into leverage, memory into enforcement, and patience into the most precise tool of diplomacy the galaxy had ever seen. The council was no longer a governing body. It had become a collection of debtors, scrambling to meet terms dictated with unflinching clarity. Across the systems, practical compliance unfolded with the same meticulous efficiency. Industrial complexes, transport networks, and communication grids were subtly modified under human guidance. Energy flows were redirected to supply critical resources to planets and colonies that had endured human suffering. Minerals and materials, previously hoarded or misallocated, were carefully distributed to ensure the equitable fulfillment of the ledger. It was not theft, it was not coercion. It was justice, calculated with precision, executed without waste, and enforced without malice. Humanity had proven that victory need not be loud. It could be silent, systemic, and complete. Even militaries that had once believed themselves untouchable found themselves constrained. Starfleets attempting to resist had their logistics subtly compromised. Fuel depots were rerouted, navigational arrays subtly altered, and communication networks compromised, not to destroy, but to enforce compliance with minimal disruption. Human operatives, masked and disciplined, moved through orbital stations and remote facilities like ghosts, ensuring that every system adhered to the ledger's provisions. The effect was profound. Entire fleets, entire chains of command, realized that resistance was not futile because of overwhelming force, but because every potential move had already been anticipated and neutralized before it could be executed. The social impact of humanity's methodical realignment was equally profound. Planets that had once dismissed Earth now incorporated human principles into governance. Education systems began teaching caution, respect, and the importance of observing consequences. Economic strategies were rewritten to anticipate precise accounting of debts and obligations. Diplomacy itself evolved. Empires that had relied on intimidation and projection of power now measured their every word and every action against the ledger set forth by a species they had long underestimated. Humans had redefined what it meant to negotiate, to plan, and to enforce agreements across light years of space. Even within the Council itself, fractures appeared. Long-standing alliances shifted as members debated the prudence of opposing Earth. Some argued that submission would preserve dignity and resources, while others clung to tradition, unwilling to accept that a single planet could enforce terms across an entire galaxy. The human envoy, ever patient, allowed these debates to play out, observing without interference. Prometheus modeled outcomes with exacting precision, ensuring that every faction's behavior was accounted for, every possible divergence neutralized or redirected. Humanity did not intervene unnecessarily. They allowed the galaxy to adjust under the undeniable logic of their power. As the ledger's enforcement continued, stories began to circulate across star systems. Merchants spoke of shipments arriving with perfect timing and precision. Scholars marveled at the subtle coordination of systems previously thought incapable of cooperation. Even the most cynical politicians admitted that humanity's influence was unlike any other. It was quiet, systematic, and utterly inescapable. Legends of masked humans who moved silently through the machinery of the galaxy began to spread, reinforcing the lesson that patience, observation, and precision could rival any fleet or weapon system in effectiveness. By the time the Galactic Council reconvened for what would become the final session of adjustment, the galaxy had already transformed. Economic patterns, political alliances, and military strategies were all realigned to accommodate the inevitability of human oversight. The ledger had done more than enforce debts. It had reshaped the galaxy itself, aligning systems to principles humans had perfected over centuries: meticulous observation, patient enforcement, and strategic inevitability. Every empire now operated with a clear understanding: Underestimating humanity was no longer an option. And yet, the humans themselves remained calm. The masked envoys walked among the council chambers without haste, observing, recording, and noting subtleties. They did not gloat, they did not flaunt power, and they did not celebrate. Their satisfaction was implicit, a quiet affirmation that the ledger was complete, that the galaxy had realigned itself according to principles of justice and balance, and that every system now understood at a fundamental level the consequences of prior arrogance. The realignment was not a show of force. It was a demonstration of intelligence, patience, and the quiet, undeniable power of principle applied with unerring precision. In that moment, the galaxy learned a lesson that would echo for generations. Victory need not be won through chaos, and dominance need not be enforced through destruction. Humanity had proven that discipline, calculation, and patience could bend entire civilizations to fairness without a single act of wanton violence. The Council had tabled peace, but humanity had dictated terms, collected obligations, and reshaped the galaxy itself. The era of underestimation was over. The era of the masked humans, patient, precise, and unyielding, had begun. With the ledger fully enforced and the galaxy realigned, humanity stood at the threshold of a new era. The masked envoys no longer merely represented a planet, they represented a principle, patience, observation, and the inescapable certainty of consequence. The Galactic Council, once the unchallenged authority of trillions of systems, now recognized that Earth had rewritten the rules. Authority was no longer merely a measure of fleets, weapons, or territorial control. It was a demonstration of intelligence, foresight, and the disciplined execution of justice. The galaxy had learned that the smallest species, underestimated for centuries, could impose order with precision unmatched by any empire. Planets across star systems sent their final transfers with quiet obedience, not out of fear, but out of respect for the meticulous inevitability humanity had displayed. Entire fleets that had once projected confidence now aligned to Earth's directives, not because they were coerced, but because resistance had proven to be mathematically and tactically futile. Supply chains, trade networks, and diplomatic channels all shifted to accommodate the new balance of power, demonstrating the subtle mastery humans had exercised over systems that had once ignored them. Every act of compliance reinforced the lesson that patience and strategy could achieve what fleets and weapons could not. In the heart of the Council, ambassadors whispered of the masked humans with a mixture of awe and dread. They spoke of the calm precision with which Earth had enforced the ledger, the way entire star systems had realigned without a single act of wanton aggression, and the quiet inevitability that had bent empires to compliance. It was not a lesson in domination, it was a lesson in intelligence, patience, and the application of principle with surgical accuracy. Stories spread of how humans had manipulated logistics, navigational paths, and even political factions to achieve results without bloodshed. The galaxy began to understand that the greatest power was not firepower, but foresight. Human operatives continued to monitor every system with meticulous care. Prometheus, the central AI, maintained constant awareness, tracking compliance, predicting outcomes, and ensuring that no empire could exploit gaps or misinterpretations. Even as payments and obligations were met, the humans observed quietly, correcting minor deviations, reinforcing networks, and ensuring that the principle of inevitability remained absolute. There was no malice, no gloating, only the disciplined application of logic and strategy. The galaxy understood that humanity's influence was permanent, not because it was violent, but because it was unavoidable. As the final sessions of the Galactic Council concluded, the full scope of humanity's achievement became clear. The ledger had not only enforced debts, it had transformed governance, diplomacy, and commerce across trillions of systems. Every empire now accounted for the principle that underestimating Earth carried consequences, that patience and observation were as lethal as fleets, and that no slight, insult, or act of aggression could escape record. Humanity had demonstrated that strategy applied with precision and intelligence could achieve results that brute force could never reach. The Council, humbled and irrevocably altered, acknowledged the shift in authority not through words but through compliance, realignment, and the silent acceptance of Earth's supremacy in principle. Beyond the Council chambers, the galaxy adapted. Trade networks operated with unprecedented efficiency, as humans ensured resources were fairly distributed to compensate for historical injustices. Knowledge and technology flowed to previously neglected systems, not arbitrarily, but calculated to restore balance and reinforce compliance. Societies learned to plan with foresight, considering the consequences of every action, and even cultures that had once mocked humanity began to integrate principles of observation, patience, and precision into governance. Humanity's influence had become a framework for the galaxy itself. The masked envoys, ever silent, ever precise, walked among systems without recognition, their presence subtle but unmistakable. They were not conquerors, but architects of inevitability. Entire civilizations learned to measure their actions not by power or intimidation, but by logic, accountability, and respect for principle. The humans had not merely collected debts. They had demonstrated a new standard for interstellar civilization, one in which intelligence, patience, and precise execution could shape outcomes across light years without resorting to wanton destruction. Even the Galactic Council, once the supreme arbiter, now operated with humanity as the guiding principle. Their decrees, once absolute, were tempered by the understanding that Earth's oversight was inescapable, and that misjudging the humans carried a cost no empire could afford. Diplomacy evolved into a subtle dance of precision, observation, and respect, guided by the quiet, unyielding authority of a species that had endured, calculated, and executed with perfect inevitability. Legends of the masked humans spread like starlight across the galaxy. Stories described the quiet mastery with which they had imposed balance, the methodical collection of debts owed for centuries of insult and aggression, and the subtle yet absolute reorganization of entire star systems. The narrative was not one of fear, but of admiration and respect. A species that had endured the scorn of empires had risen to demonstrate that intelligence, strategy, and patience could reshape the galaxy itself. And so, the era of inevitability began. Humanity's presence was no longer a matter of concern. It was a principle that governed every system, every fleet, and every diplomatic exchange. The ledger had been enforced. The debts had been collected. The galaxy had realigned itself to acknowledge the inescapable logic and precision of a species once underestimated. Humans had proven that endurance was power, observation was weaponry, and patience was a force greater than fleets or superweapons. The masked envoys stood silent, a testament to the unyielding principle that had reshaped the stars. The universe had laughed at humanity for centuries. Now it bowed, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The era of inevitability was not announced with fanfare or conquest. It was quietly, systematically, and irrevocably established. Humanity had endured, remembered, calculated, and executed with perfect precision. And the galaxy knew, finally and forever, that underestimating Earth was impossible, unwise, and ultimately inconceivable.